story of Deirdre of the Sorrows. There came a time during the reign of Conor when Ulster was at peace. People enjoyed happy and fulfilling lives, and much time was devoted to sport and feasting. It became a tradition that each of the chiefs would in turn organise a great feast and invite King Conor and the other chiefs. It came to be the turn of Phelim to host such a feast. Phelim was not a warrior, but he had gained his high place in society through being a bard and storyteller. Indeed, he was considered the finest storyteller in all of Ireland, and such was the esteem in which he was held that everyone wanted to attend his feast. Phelim put tremendous work into preparing for the feast. This was an important event for him, and he was anxious that the king should judge it to be the finest of banquets. He had built new quarters, especially for the king and his Red Branch warriors. He had gathered vast quantities of game and delicacies. He had wine imported from the Mediterranean and great cheeses from Brittany. He had even brought the best musicians from all over Ireland and assembled a choir of the finest voices for the entertainment of his guests. All was in place when the big day arrived, and Phelim and his wife waited in eager anticipation for the king's arrival. When Phelim finally heard word that the king's party were arriving, he stood out to welcome them. But as the king rounded the bend, a terrible storm suddenly broke out. Thunder and lightning filled the sky, and great sheets of rain fell on the king's party. They scrambled for shelter, but the king remained in his chariot, regarding the spectacle with a frown on his face through steely eyes. Phelim ran to him and urged him to come to the hearth of his great dining room for warmth and shelter, and the king eventually acquiesced. But when he spoke, his mood was grim. "This is no ordinary storm," he declared. "I fear it is a portent of some terrible disaster to come." It was not the start to the feast that Phelim had wished for, but after much feasting, music and storytelling, the king finally began to relax. Seeing this, the other guests took it as their cue to start enjoying themselves too. Phelim's wife was with child, and she retired early, bidding the guests to enjoy themselves and make merry late into the night. But soon after, the night was pierced with a blood-curdling scream. Conor's warriors reached for their swords and shields. Phelim's servant rushed in to say that the scream had come from his wife's chamber. Phelim jumped up and rushed to her room to see what was the matter. He returned not long after with his white-faced wife by his side. She told them that the scream came not from her, but from the unborn baby in her womb. Conor asked his druid, Cathbad, what might be the meaning of this strange event, and the druid went to the woman and placed his hand on her. His face grew very solemn, and he shook his head. Phelim feared that the child had died inside the womb, and urged Cathbad to tell them what had come to pass. But the druid refused to speak. The king stood up and commanded Cathbad to speak of the meaning of this strange scream. Eventually he spoke. "The child is not harmed. It will be a girl, and she will grow up to be the most beautiful woman that this land has ever known. She will be a woman of great virtue, and love and loyalty will be her strongest qualities. Men will covet her, and women will be jealous. Bloody battles will be waged for her affections." Cathbad looked into the face of Phelim's wife. "It gives me no pleasure to relate this prophecy to you, but she will bring great suffering and death to the men of Ulster. She will become known as Deirdre of the Sorrows, and her life will not be a happy one. Phelim took his shocked wife back to her chamber, and the hall rang with talk of what had happened. The king took no part in the discussion, but remained deep in thought. Later in the evening, Phelim returned to say that his wife had given birth to a baby girl. At this news, many of the king's warriors called out for the baby to be killed, crying, "Spare the men of Ulster this anguish, O king. Let us kill the baby now." Phelim rose to his feet. "This is my daughter you speak of. Any man who seeks to kill her will have to kill me first." The warriors looked to their king for a sense of his judgment on this matter. Eventually the king spoke. "The matter is too grave for any hasty decision. Coward, go out into the night and consult the stars about this child's destiny. And when you've learned as much as there is to know, return to us." Coward went out into the night and was gone a long time. The festivities resumed, slowly at first, but then became lively. Phelim was relieved that the immediate danger to his daughter seemed to have passed. But then Cobalt returned with an expression as dark as thunder. "It is even more grave than what I spoke of earlier. This child will be responsible for the downfall of the Red Branch Knights if she grows to adulthood. Of that I am sure." All eyes turned to King Conor for his reaction. Phelim threw himself on his knees before him. "Please, Conor, please, spare my daughter." Conor asked for the infant to be brought into the room. The maid was sent for, and she returned with the infant wrapped in swaddling clothes. All who gazed upon her beautiful, tiny face were filled with revulsion at the thought of killing her. Conor declared, "I will protect this child against the prophecy. I must take her away from you, Phelim, but I promise you that she will be safe and well looked after. She will be reared in a secret place, and when she is of age, I will marry her myself." Many of the men present thought that the king was making a terrible mistake, but none dared disagree with him. King Conor had a fort built for Deirdre in a remote part of his kingdom, and she grew up there. She had a maid, Leorcum, to look after her, and apart from this woman, only the king and his druid were allowed to visit Deirdre. Leorcum was a woman of great wisdom and learning, and Deirdre was happy with her as a child. She grew up into a beautiful woman as foretold, but on account of Leorcum's teaching and instruction, she was also a woman of wisdom and knowledge beyond her years. Then, one day she told Leorcum that she felt sad. She had never uttered these words before, and Leorcum was immediately concerned. "Sad, child? What makes you sad?" Deirdre replied, "I'm sad because I yearn for the company of someone my own age. I yearn to meet a young man who could be a husband to me. I had a strange and powerful dream last night, and in it I saw the face of a handsome, dark-haired warrior. His cheeks were as red as blood, and his skin as white as snow." Leorcum almost gasped, for it was as if Deirdre had described a young warrior, Nisha, who lived not far from their castle. Even though the woman knew that it was impossible that Deirdre had ever seen him. Almost before she realized it, Leorcum heard herself saying, "I know of just such a man. He is indeed a man among men, and many women would love to have him as their husband." Lercum had great admiration for Naoise and happily said far more about him than she should. He is one of the 3 sons of Uisneach. These 3 brothers are the most skillful and courageous in Ireland. It is said that they could hold all the warriors of Ulster at bay if they wished. Deirdre pleaded with Lercum to bring this man to her, but she refused. Time passed, and the date set for Deirdre's wedding to Conor grew close. Lercum began to allow Deirdre greater freedom to take walks away from the castle on condition that she spoke to no one. One afternoon, while walking in the woods, Deirdre spied a handsome, raven-haired young warrior. She knew instinctively that he was Naoise. Immediately, she knew that she loved this man and always would. As she approached him, Naoise realized that she must be the Deirdre that the king had been hiding away. He held back. "You're the king's wife-to-be," he said. Deirdre looked into Naoise's eyes. "If I had a choice between that old king and a man like you, I would happily marry you." Naoise felt a powerful feeling of love stirring in his heart, but he remembered the prophecy. "I cannot take you with me. It is prophesied that you will bring sorrow to the men of Ulster. That is why the king has hidden you away in this place." Deirdre ran up to him and put her arms around him. "I am offering you my love. Only dishonour and shame could fall on any man who refused me." Naoise looked at her and knew that no matter what the consequences, he had no choice. His destiny was bound up with this woman. That night, Deirdre and Naoise fled Ulster, taking his 2 brothers, the other sons of Uisneach, with them. For a time, they stayed with different kings in Ireland, but none were keen to give them shelter once word reached them of Conor's great rage and his declaration that terrible carnage would be wreaked on any who gave them shelter. Eventually, Deirdre and the sons of Uisneach had to leave Ireland and travel to the remote highlands of Scotland. But life was hard there, especially in winter when the hunting was slow and they were often hungry. Eventually, they went to the King of Scotland and asked him to give them shelter. He was delighted to have such powerful warriors fight for him, and he immediately took them in. The sons of Uisneach tried to keep Deirdre's existence a secret, but one day, a courtier of the king spied her bathing by the river. He rushed back to tell the king that the most loveliest woman that ever walked the earth was living among his new warriors. He urged the king to kill Naoise and take Deirdre for himself, but the king preferred a more subtle tactic. He had his servant called to Deirdre when the sons of Uisneach were on a mission, and seek to tempt her with offers of great power should she leave Naoise for the king, but she would not be turned. Then the king decided that to have Naoise killed in battle would surely be the best way to secure Deirdre's love for himself. He sent the sons of Uisneach on increasingly more dangerous and difficult missions, but such was their prowess, they were always victorious and returned safely, no matter how great the hazards they faced. Eventually, the king's patience wore out. He came to Deirdre one day and told her that she had until sunset to decide. Either she'd come to him voluntarily, or he would take her by force. Deirdre warned the brothers, and they left Scotland that night on a boat, heading for an island where it was said you could see the Kingdom of Scotland and Ulster simultaneously. They were only there a few days when news reached them that Conor was ready to forgive them and wanted them to return to Ulster. Deirdre was initially suspicious of the king's message, but they had been through such hard times and their future seemed so bleak that they were ready to throw themselves to the forces of luck and chance. They sent back a message accepting, on one condition: Fergus, the warrior they trusted most, was to escort them home and act as guarantor of their safety. But Deirdre was right to be suspicious, for Conor was not sincere in his offer. He still desperately wanted Deirdre for himself, and he was quite happy for Fergus to be their escort, because he knew that Fergus had one weakness. Years before, he had been the subject of a geish, or curse, that meant that if Fergus ever refused to attend a banquet being held in his honour, certain death would follow. As Fergus was accompanying Deirdre and the sons of Uisneach to King Conor's castle, Conor had a local chief intercept them and invite Fergus to a feast being held in his honour. Fergus guessed that it was a trick, but had no choice but to attend. In the meantime, old enemies of Conor, led by Owen, had come to make peace with Conor. He accepted their offer on one condition: they must kill the sons of Uisneach. Soon after, Deirdre and the sons of Uisneach arrived at Conor's, unsure whether they really were being forgiven or if it was all a cruel trick. Their worst fears were realised as Owen drew his sword. Naoise and his brothers were killed instantly, and Deirdre was taken away and imprisoned. Fergus heard of Conor's treachery and was furious. For more than 16 years he waged terrible war on Conor and his men. There were many deaths and much suffering as the men of Ulster waged war against each other. Still, every day, Conor visited Deirdre in her room and tried to woo her. He made her gifts of the finest jewels and had the best musicians play her favourite tunes, but she would not even look him in the eye. For a year, she did not smile or laugh, and barely ate or slept. His love for her turning to hatred, Conor decided to punish Deirdre for withholding her love from him. He arranged that for 1 year she would be passed to the custody of Owen, the man who had killed her beloved Naoise. Owen came to receive her, and the three travelled by chariot with Deirdre sitting in the middle of them. Still seeking to provoke a reaction or some emotion in her, Conor waited until they passed the graves of the sons of Uisneach and said, "Well, Deirdre, aren't you the lucky woman, sitting here between two such fine warriors, like a ewe between two great rams?" At this cruel taunt, Deirdre could bear the sorrow of her life no more, and leapt from the chariot to her death. The clouds broke, and the sun shone for the first time in many days, casting its rays onto the beautiful, sad face of Deirdre of the Sorrows, at peace at last.